The dining room built on Defiance. At first glance, it looked like a mistake. A restaurant opening without investors, without influencers, without any attempt to fit the era it was born into. In a time when success was engineered before the first plate was served, this dining room chose resistance instead, and dared the world to walk inside anyway. The city had emerged in prized conformity disguised as creativity. Menus followed trends with surgical precision. Interiors were designed for cameras, not comfort. Chefs spoke fluently in narratives before their food ever spoke at all. Against that backdrop, this dining room felt almost confrontational in its quiet refusal to participate. Its founder had seen the machinery up close. Years spent in celebrated kitchens taught him how influence really worked, how vision was slowly traded for approval, how independence disappeared behind partnerships labeled opportunity. When he finally stepped away, he carried one conviction with him. If this restaurant existed, it would exist on its own terms. So he built it deliberately wrong. No branding strategy, no launch campaign, no story prepared for interviews. The menu was short and unchanging. The room was modest, almost austere. The servers moved at a pace dictated by readiness, not expectation. And the rules were simple: no substitutions, no explanations, no compromise. Not because the chef wanted control, but because he wanted clarity. At first, the dining room struggled. Critics dismissed it as stubborn. Diners complained about rigidity. Consultants offered help but refused. Each rejection tightened the pressure, confirming what the city already believed. Defiance was unsustainable. But slowly, something unexpected happened. People began returning, not out of curiosity, but out of relief. Relief from noise. Relief from being persuaded. Relief from needing to understand before feeling. Inside that dining room, guests were not sold an experience. They were asked to meet one. And in that refusal to perform, the restaurant began attracting exactly the kind of attention it never asked for, attention that would soon test how far Defiance could go before it demanded a cost. The dining room had drawn its line. Now the world would decide whether to respect it or try to break it. As word spread, the dining room became a quiet provocation. Guests arrived prepared to negotiate, asking for changes, explanations, flexibility. They were met with calm refusal. The rules were not aggressive. They were simply immovable. And for many, that was unsettling. Choice had become a comfort. Here, it was limited on purpose. Early reviews were sharp. Writers accused the restaurant of arrogance disguised as purity. They questioned whether refusing adaptation was courage or insecurity. Social commentary followed, framing the dining room as anti-modern, anti-accessible, anti-progress. The chef read none of it. He had learned long ago that responding would turn defiance into debate, and debate into dilution. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere held steady. Service unfolded without hurry. Plates arrived when ready. Silence was not rushed to be filled. Some diners left frustrated, convinced the restaurant was intentionally hostile. Others stayed unusually long, unsure why they felt calmer than expected. The food did not charm. It grounded. It asked nothing except attention. The staff felt the pressure differently. Friends warned them they were tying their futures to a stubborn idea. Suppliers hesitated, uncomfortable with a place that refused scale. Opportunities passed by loudly, making the quiet choice feel heavier by the day. Yet those who stayed did, so with growing conviction. They weren't building careers. They were protecting a space. Then the resistance shifted. A prominent hospitality group attempted to acquire the building. When that failed, the landlord raised concerns about operational rigidity. Inspectors appeared more frequently. Paperwork slowed. The message became clearer with each visit. Independence was tolerable only until it became influential, and influence had begun to surface. Young chefs came on their nights off, sitting at the counter, watching without asking questions. They didn't photograph. They didn't post. They observed. Diners started recommending the restaurant quietly, as if sharing a secret too delicate to advertise. The dining room wasn't growing, but it was concentrating something rare. That concentration unsettled the city. The restaurant was no longer being ignored. It was being watched. And with attention came a familiar test. one that every Defiance base eventually faces. An offer framed as support, a compromise disguised as protection, a chance to survive comfortably, if it would just bend slightly. The question was no longer whether the dining room could endure criticism. It was whether it could survive the moment when Defiance was invited to soften itself in exchange for safety. And that moment was approaching fast. The offer arrived quietly, delivered without ceremony. A partnership proposal framed in careful language, respectful of vision, protective of values. The group promised stability, legal insulation, and financial ease. The dining room could remain largely unchanged, they said, while subtle adjustments ensured longevity. Longer hours, broader appeal, just enough flexibility to survive. The staff felt the weight immediately. Survival had been fragile from the start. Rent, supplies, fatigue. Defiance was expensive. Some wondered if this was the moment resistance matured into sustainability. Others sensed a familiar shape of compromise hiding beneath polite assurances. The chef listened to every voice, but spoke very little. He understood the pattern. Defiance is tolerated until it proves influential. Then it is invited to become manageable. Inside the dining room, tension thickened. Service continued, but with an edge. Plates carried more than flavor. They carried the unspoken question of whether this place will remain itself. Diners noticed. Conversations softened. Meals lingered. It felt like the air before a storm. Then came the night that forced clarity. A large group arrived unannounced, connected to the very partners offering protection. They ordered everything. They asked questions mid-service. They requested adjustments politely, smiling as if the rules were already flexible. The staff hesitated, instinct pulling them in two directions. The chef watched from the pass, silent. When the first request was declined, the tone shifted. Not hostile, disappointed, as if Defiance were a personal inconvenience. One guest leaned back and said softly, "You know, this could be easier for everyone." The words landed heavier than any threat. The chef stepped forward and addressed the table. Not defensively, not angrily, but with unmistakable calm. He explained that the rules were not a posture. They were the structure that made the dining room possible. Without them, this was just another restaurant pretending to stand for something. The group finished their meal in silence. The following week, pressure intensified. Paperwork stalled. Suppliers hesitated. Rumors of lease changes resurfaced. The message was unmistakable now: accept protection or face exposure. The dining room stood at the edge of its own survival. That night, after the last guest left, the staff gathered. No speeches, no votes, just one question hanging in the room. If this place disappears, what are we actually losing? The answer arrived slowly but clearly. Not jobs, not status, not recognition. What they were protecting was the possibility of a space that did not ask permission to exist honestly. The chef made his decision before dawn, and the consequences of that choice would soon test whether Defiance could endure its final, most dangerous moment. Not attack, but absorption. The response was simple. The chef declined the partnership without negotiation. No counteroffer, no delay, just a refusal delivered with the same calm that defined the dining room itself. The protection vanished instantly. So did the patience. Within weeks, the consequences arrived. The lease would not be renewed. Renovations were planned. The space was suddenly needed for a concept better aligned with the city's future. Inspectors returned with sharper eyes. Suppliers tightened terms. The message was no longer subtle. Defiance had reached its limit. The dining room did not protest. Service continued exactly as before. No signs announced what was coming. No speeches were made. Guests sensed something closing in, though they could not name it. Meals grew quieter. Time stretched. Plates were received with a reverence usually reserved for final moments. On the last night, the dining room was full, not with spectacle, but with stillness. No one rushed. No one asked questions. The chef cooked without deviation. The staff moved with deliberate care. When the final dish left the kitchen, the room felt complete rather than finished. The doors closed. And yet, the dining room did not disappear. In the months that followed, something subtle unfolded across the city. New restaurants opened without launch campaigns. Menus shortened. Rules appeared, not as marketing, but as boundaries. Chefs stopped explaining themselves. Diners adjusted. They listened. They stayed. The Defiant dining room had not survived in form. It survived in permission. Permission to refuse what diluted purpose. Permission to exist without justification. Permission to let clarity matter more than comfort. Years later, no plaque marked the space where it once stood. But those who had eaten there recognized its influence immediately when they felt again. Somewhere quieter, somewhere honest, somewhere unwilling to bend. Defiance, it turned out, was not about standing forever. It was about standing long enough to change what comes next. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The